The name of the presentation is European and International Innovation, Standardization and Trends in Learning Environment Teaching, I believe, in that. Christian Stracke is an associate professor in the Duisburg-Essen University in Germany, and at the same time is an associate professor in the Korea National Open University in Seoul. He's developing now, he's performing now the doctorate, as far as I know, and in Duisburg-Essen, and is working in the implementation and benefits of the standardizations in the quality development for the e-learning. Christian, thank you very much to be here.
Yeah. Muchas gracias por vuestra invitación. Pero quiero de estar aquí más nuestro español es terrible. Por esa razón prefiero de hablar inglés. Disculpe.
Perfect.
I'm very sorry about that, and I hope that I can improve, and I have definitely to come back because I've learned that this is not only a beauty city that I knew before, but it is also an excellent and exciting campus we are here on, and I've never seen such not only huge but also promising campus across Europe. Mm-hmm. And it's also one of the leading throughout the world. That's why, at least I have to come back here.
You're always welcome.
Maybe that is not a promise for you, but now you're in fear. Okay. Anyway, I don't know if I can stand up here. Is that correct with the recording?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Because I'd like to speak a little bit up here and to show you also something on the slides that you know where I'm referring to, and that in that way I can also see you a little bit better and immediately answer your question. That means please interrupt me if you have any specific concerns, open questions, if something is not easy to understand. I'm dealing now with a topic that is normally causing a lot of questions, because standardization is, nobody is familiar with standardization. Only a few experts are dealing with that, and that's right, because standards should work. You should not care about standardization if you don't want to deal with that as an expert, but standards should work, and the problem is always starting if standards are not working, as we have seen in the example from QTI. And
a micro.
Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. And second problem that we are facing is that the majority of people don't like standard due to a misunderstanding, because majority of people are thinking, oh, standards, they're prescribing what I should do. I have to follow the standard step by step. And I will show you in some cases that is right, and that is also needed, but in other cases not. And we will see a little bit more on that. Okay. You can also share, of course, this presentation here according to that license agreement, and you will get all the slides later on the website, I suppose. I was already introduced kindly as I'm the professor at the University of Duisburg-Essen here in Europe, but also adjunct professor in Seoul, Korea. That's why I'm also doing a lot of business with Far East. And finally, I'm also the convener of the ISO Standardization Committee, responsible for quality management, quality assurance in learning, education and training. And I'm also chair of the responsible CEN, that means European Standardization Committee, TC 353. And we had the pleasure to meet here today in the morning and at noontime. And we just finished up our meeting this afternoon, and that's why I was really pleased to accept the invitation to speak up here during that eMadrid conference series. We have also a German e-learning association called DELAN. Maybe, I'm not sure, I think here in Spain there's not such a e-learning association of professional e-learning providers. I'm a member of the board and I'm one of the co-founders, and I'm also running my own institute that is called ELC. Well, I don't want to bother you where Essen is, where I'm coming from, just to show you it's just in the middle here, and we have some old tradition on coal mining. Everybody is aware, okay, the region called Ruhrgebiet that is dealing mainly with dark environment out of that old-fashioned industry, but you can see a lot more here, and some of places showing up that there's more green than you expect. What we are doing is it's easy, online and e-learning. Competence development is our second major topic, and then we are doing a lot in standardization, but also in development cooperation. Okay, standardization worldwide will be the first topic here. I will show you first some general overview on the standardization field, followed by the introduction of some international as well as European standards. And I will just introduce to you then some ongoing projects. You will find a lot more slides later on in the presentation. I will not speak to all of them. You can just have a look on them during the next days. Okay. The first question is, what are standards? And here the misunderstanding normally is starting. Standards should be based on international consensus and serve as instruments. That is most important. Standards are not to push you to follow them, but they should work for you. They should support you. Otherwise, they are doing something completely wrong. In that sense, we have currently two major issues. Sorry, I'm just recovering from a cold last week, and that's why maybe I have to repeat it several times. We have two major challenges here in current standardization. The one is interoperability, and we have seen in the example before concerning assessment and IMS QTI how difficult it is to achieve 100% interoperability. That means in interoperability you have to follow 100% compliance. But next to that, we have also the issue of quality development. How we can ensure that what we are developing is providing high, if not even best quality for learning, education, and training. Standards are not standards for themselves, but standards should support to improve the quality of the learning opportunities. In that sense, standards should also be sometimes light-weighted, only with the one and only main goal and objective to achieve the appropriate quality for the different target groups we'd like to focus on. Okay. If we are talking about standards, we have a little bit to distinguish between different kinds of standards, and we have already seen one specific standard, the IMS QTI, in one field, and I have to tell you it's a little bit more complex. The standardization world is not easy to separate, and for that reason we have started to draw up that reference model for standards to have a clear distinctions and criteria for the different groups of standards. In principle, we have three major types of standards. On the left side, you have the implementation standards. You can call them technical standards. In the middle, you have got conceptual standards, providing some generic frameworks, or, for example, process models, like the quality standard ISO 9001. And on the right side, you have got level standards. level standards are out of scope for international or European standardization. Level standards are politically set levels of quality that has to be achieved. For example, the ministries are telling you what pupils should know at the end of 1 year or at finishing school. That they are allowed, for example, to enter the universities. Or the states ministries are telling you which are the outcomes of specific study programs you have to achieve, and so on. That means level standards are defining the level of quality and achievement at the end of some learning opportunities. Now, the relation to the two main issues and topics for standardization, that are interoperability and quality development, are easy to explain. The implementation standards are always dealing with interoperability. And I'm listing here some implementation standards, and also QTI could put here on this side. That means implementation standards has to address only interoperability and has to be followed by 100% compliance. Otherwise, you're failing. In this sense, implementation standards are prescriptions. But for IT systems, that is most important, that there are some guidelines like implementation standards to follow. Otherwise, you have these difficulties shown up by the different IT systems developed by proprietary providers, not looking so much on the interoperability. Level standards are always dealing with quality development, but out of scope of standardization, as already told before. Conceptual standard could address both interoperability as well as quality development. That depends on which kind of conceptual standard do you have. For example, you can have such conceptual standard like MLR or Access for All, providing a generic framework that is a family of standards, but they have to be adopted to your specific situation, and then through this adoption you are specifying the technical requirements. That means you're setting up a kind of implementation standard out of the conceptual standard as a basis. Other way around, you can have other conceptual standards like the quality standard RFDQ that I will introduce in a minute. That is also providing a framework, but that you have to abstract and to adapt it to your given situation in the way that you have to only use it as a basis for your own development of new parts. In that sense, RFDQ will not be brought from the top down to the bottom of interoperability issues, but from the top even one level higher to your specific requirements. Conceptual standards dealing with quality development always need your personal or organizational adaptation towards your specific situation. And I will show you one example for both, for a conceptual standard dealing with interoperability issues and one with the quality development as a major objective, to also show a little bit of the difference. Okay, then you could also have a deeper breakdown of that reference model for the standards. I don't want to go into the details, just to show you that you can also draw 3 dimensions out of it. And for the 3 dimension, you can also have different criteria to distinguish all standards. And you can do that by assigning to each standard that exists one type, one domain criteria, and one entity. And that is working quite well, as we have done that for all existing standards in the past, and that was showing up, for example, also the lack of standard in specific fields. For example, we had a lot of standards in the field didactics and also learning content, but not dealing with didactics in the learning environment and not dealing with didactics in the fields of roles, and also not dealing with didactics in the field of learning systems. All of them were directed to methods, learning resources, or practice. And here you can easily see then the gaps that are still existing in standardization nowadays. Okay, that's for the introduction concerning the different types of standards. I told you at the beginning, it's not so easy. The next challenge is we have not only different type of standards, but we have also different standardization organizations dealing with all these types of standards. Okay, first, it's easy. At the international level, we have only one standardization committee that is approved by the United Nations and dealing with IT for learning, education, and training, that is SC36. The subcommittee SC36, and it is called SC36 because it's a subcommittee from both the ISO as the big standardization organization, founded after the Second World War by the United Nations, and IEC, that is the long tradition standardization committee by the electrotechnicians. They started first because one of the first issues were how to standardize the plugs. If there would not have been standardization of the different power supplies across the different countries in Europe, then there had been a huge danger. That's why the electrotechnicians were the first to address standardization issues, and they're insisting to have their own standardization committee. Okay, that's why in some fields, ISO, that is responsible for the whole world outside of electrotechnology, is cooperating with IEC, and in that field of IT for LET, for learning, education, and training, it makes sense. That's why we have a subcommittee here, sub of ISO as well as IEC. That is SC36 at the international level, and at the European level it's also easy because we have only one technical committee, 353, that is the number. We have a lot of different branches and sectors. Branch or sector 353 is learning, education, and training, and information and communication technologies. And that was the one that took place today here. At the first floor we had the meeting, and as we have always 2 plenaries every year. And we were very pleased to be invited to Madrid. And finally, at the national level, you have different bodies. In Germany, it is DIN. Here, it is INOR, dealing with the national standardization. Well, that sounds very simple, isn't it? Yeah? 1, 2, 3, I can remember. But then the confusion is starting here. And here you have a lot of other standardization organizations. Starting with IEEE or IMS, already mentioned with the specification IMS QTI. ADL from the US defense, AICC from the aviation sector, but also generic ones like W3C for the internet specifications, DC Dublin Core for library sector, and so on. The same applies at the European level, but here we are happy that we have at least one workshop for learning technologies that is combining the European activities. And you have also a lot of national activities, like for example here, eMadrid is also a very interesting program. I was surprised to see what is happening here in Spain or in the region of Madrid, because we had also a similar approach maybe 5 years ago in the region where I'm living in, that is Cologne and Bonn, the former capital, and that was also focusing on a regional approach to have that exchange of experiences among the interested people, and I'm very happy that I can contribute here. Well, the major issue here is that the left side is dealing with official standards and the right side is dealing with specifications. And the difference between official standards and specification is simple. On the one hand, you have formal de jure standards developed by approved and appointed standardization bodies endorsed by the United Nations, and they are run by a national delegation system that's ensuring that nobody is taking over the power of these committees. And clear and transparent directives and procedures, you can download them, thousands of pages to read. It's a fantastic lecture for the next weekend. And on the other hand, you have community, industrial, and organization specifications by specific consortia. And more or less closed shop. Sometimes you have to pay some fees. Sometimes it's only for specific providers of a specific sector and market and so on. Well, I would like only to show you now the examples and outcomes from the formal de jure standardization bodies. That means the real standards, and I'm not showing you specifications. And first I'd like to introduce SE36 as a leading international standardization body here. SE36 has a long history. It started in the year 2000 in London, and that is totally wrong here. The last plenary was not in the USA, but in Strasbourg 1 month ago. Sorry for that, I will correct that in a minute. And the next plenary is taking place in Shanghai in September, as we have always 2 plenaries every year. Most important is 41 national bodies plus 25 liaison organizations from all over the world, from all 5 continents. And here are the major outcomes, and I cannot go into all of them in details, but at least I wanted to provide you with a list. If you want to learn more about them, please have a look. The problem with ISO standard is that they are always referred by numbers. That is not easy to understand. ISO IEC 9796-1, that's not easy to remember, and if you ask yourself tomorrow what was the number, ISO IEC 9796-1, who knows? If you can repeat that tomorrow morning again. But we can work that out, and everybody can now start trying to repeat that in his mind or aloud or whatever you prefer. But anyway, ISO IEC 9796-1, it's also called, and maybe that's easier to remember, RFDQ. RFDQ, that's the reference framework for the description of quality approaches. And that was the first major outcome of SE36, a quality standard covering the whole field of processes within learning, education, and training. And I will show you in a minute what that standard is about. The next major outcome is ISO IEC 9788, that is MLR. And I will also introduce that standard to you in a minute. as I think that is the second major outcome of SE36. That took us more than 9 years to approve that standard after a lot of fights and negotiations amongst the different delegations and changes from one side to the other and back again and so on. But we managed, and yes, you will see in a minute how important MLR is, because, for example, you can also solve some of the issues that were raised before concerning the interoperability amongst different systems and learning management systems by using that metadata standard. Currently, one major issue is that standard, ISO IC 20006, and this one is on competencies, an information model for competencies that is very much a high priority, if not on the top of the priorities, in standardization at the moment. And you have also heard some reasons in the first presentation why it is so important to look on outcome-oriented approaches. Okay, and I'm also listing here 2 other standards that were already published, and that is a SCORM, that is a technical report, first developed by by ADL, and then content packaging, first developed by IMS, but they were transferred, and now SE36 is taking care of them. Okay. Let's have a short look into the first one. That is the quality standard, ISO IC 9796-1, RFDQ. And you can see it is still the unique ISO standard for quality management in learning, education, and training, providing a complete reference process model that is addressing not only the processes but also the products, and also providing a potential orientation for you as a user as well as a developer of learning opportunities. And it was also adopted as a European norm. That's why you will see it also in the list of the European standards later on. And in many countries, currently more than 30 countries worldwide, more than 30 countries in Europe and more than 60 countries worldwide has already approved this and adopted as national standard. And that is part of a big picture, and you can see here that is the reference process model. We have already developed the appropriate method and metrics that can be applied within the reference process model. Currently, we are working on a good practice case and implementation guidelines, and that will lead us to the final piece, that is the harmonized quality model in the end. That could be maybe achieved in 1 or 1.5 years. Okay. That's about the quality standard. Oh, thank you much. About the quality standard. And if you want to see more about that, I can show you later on, or also provide you with an overview. And you can also see a lot of literature at the end of my presentations for further references and reading in the near future. Okay, second that I'd like to introduce to you is the new metadata standard, ISO IC 9788-1, MLR. MLR stands for Metadata for Learning Resources. Well, normally now it's the time to ask yourself, why it is called MLR, learning resources. What is a learning resource? Well, everything could be a learning resource because you can also teach people with that. That is a learning resource. If you want to show up the power that the Earth is taking, if this is falling down, then it's becoming a learning resource. That's why a lot of discussion took place if we would change that here. We have decided not to change it because not only to historical backgrounds, but metadata for learning resources is also keeping the point that we would like to address here metadata for things that are mainly considered to be used in learning, education, and training environments and contexts. That's why MLR is still the name here. What is MLR about? It's the unique ISO standard for metadata. And in that sense, you can say that it is now the follow-up of IEEE LOM. Maybe you've heard about LOM as one of the learning object metadata standard. That standard was developed in the year 2000. That means more than 10 years ago now. And it took some time to develop that follow-up. Unfortunately, MLR is not 100% compliant with MLO. And we had long debates on that, but we had to make a decision, and the decision had to be taken either to have full compliance with Dublin Core or with LOM. We have decided for Dublin Core because Dublin Core is heavily used not only in libraries but also in online repositories. And the trend is going away from such hierarchical standards, I would call them outdated, like IEEE LOM it is, towards simple, light-weighted standard like Dublin Core or like MLR. They are setting up only a rule set with simple relations from one element to another element. And you can combine as many relations and as many elements you want following the rule set that are defined within MLR. That means MLR is not prescribing exactly all the relations, but you can add additional relations that are very helpful or needed for you. Okay, and 100% compliant with Dublin Core already mentioned, and covering all kinds of resources. That's why not only learning resources. Here you could see some how it looks like. Some of the tables, I've just put them, and you can have a look later on, that these tables are only showing the data element specifications by providing the data element attributes. Here you have an example with a completed right column to see how it looks like. Or you can also have other examples by if you, for example, following other schemata or other ways to annotate your metadata, that is no problem. You can also use RDF to describe the metadata by MLR. Everything is possible with that rule set. And here you can see also an example how you can match that to other elements. And yeah. Here's an example for a rule statement that is providing first the definition of the rules, then giving some explanations by notes and examples, and then there's a second rule that is only together with the first rule building the full rule set for date and time. Maybe not easy to read from your perspective. On the screen it's better to read. Okay, and then you can also build application profiles out of that, but read that later on. I'm only mentioning that here, that you are aware that you don't only have to follow the examples, but you can also build your application profile by taking out the core metadata that are relevant for you and forget all the others, by still keeping 100 compliant with that metadata standard. And finally, in the annex, you can also find a table with English and French versions of that. That was important for us to have that as a basis for the further adoption to other languages and to show how that could work. Currently, we are working on the translation into Chinese and Japanese to address also other regions and cultures worldwide. Here, the first part for Chinese is already done, and yeah, still waiting for the completion. That means, if you look at MLR, I've presented you now the first standard, that is the framework. We'll have MLR2, having the doubling core elements in LMR. That means one-to-one relation to all the doubling core elements. The third part of MLR will be a basic application profile. That means an application profile from the shelf. You can take it and just use it if you want. But you can also develop your own application profiles. And finally, there will be one part dealing with bindings. Around that, you will have also parts for technical elements, for educational elements, for availability distribution, and for an application profile against the LOM standard, further data elements, for records, for persons, and so on. That means you can imagine many, many other application profiles around that. And finally, you can also go on almost everything to address, for example, game-based learning or PBL or whatever you are taking into account in your learning environment and setting. Okay, that's for the international level. I promised I can only give you a few examples here, and I also would like to restrict the information at the European level only on a very small amount of hints what could be interesting for you. Please pick up the things that are relevant for your daily practice and business, and feel free to contact me later on, and I hopefully can give you more information. At the European level, CEN-TC 353, Technical Committee 353, ICT for Learning, Education and Training, is the European, the Euro standardization organization in the fields of ICT for learning, education and training. And there is a specific situation here, as standards are always only a recommendation. There's no obligation to use standards. That means ISO standards are only an offer. A recommendation may be a valuable instrument for you, but if you don't like them, don't use them. It's a little bit different in the European standardization field, because European norms, that means EN standards, there is an obligation to use them within the European Commission if you are claiming the current status of technology. That's a juridical term from the lawyers. And for example, if you're setting up a bidding or a tender, and you refer to the current status of technology or techniques, then you have to apply the relevant and appropriate European standards. Otherwise, you're not following the current status of technology and techniques. And in addition, European norms, European standards, has also to be applied as national standards in all member countries of the European Union, as well as the members of CEN, by withdrawing all national standards. Okay, for that reason, we have established that TC 353. In the beginning, we believed it would be better not to deal with European standardization, but directly focus on international standardization. We have even stopped any national standardization activities in Germany 10 years ago. You will never see any German standard in the fields of learning, education, and training in the future. Since 10 years, there were no German standard on that, as we decided in a more global world, not only with global markets, but also with global communities, you have to find international consensus. That's why we started working for international standardization from the beginning. And that's why we are leading also that working field on quality assurance and quality management within ISO by myself, because we believe that international standards are the core. However, three years ago, we have decided to establish ZTC 353 to have an equivalent to the international standardization at the European level. Two major reasons. First, we wanted to have an instrument to adopt international standards as European norms, European standards, with that obligation to use in Europe. Because for European standards, that's working, it's not working for international standard. And second, we have identified a lot of topics that are of interest of the European community and the European Commission, but not addressed at the international level because there is no consensus at the international level. And finally, the European Commission has published and developed a lot of European policies in the last few years.